The episode centers on the blurred line between truth and fiction, but the finale of Notes from the Last Row is really about authorship. Throughout the series, Professor Muno believes he's writing someone else's story. By the end, he discovers that he's been the protagonist all along. Every choice he makes, every assumption he draws, and every lie he convinces himself to believe ultimately becomes part of a story that Lee Kang has been carefully constructing for years. The ending completely reframes everything that came before. Did Kim Soo-hoon actually murder anyone? The finale deliberately refuses to answer this question. For most of the season, both Muno and the audience become convinced that Kim Soo-hoon murdered Min-wee, and is now willing to kill his own wife and son to protect his reputation. The apparent evidence seems overwhelming. Lee Kang's manuscript, the hospital incident, Si-yoon's terrifying voice message, Muno's frantic race to the house, everything appears to point towards Soo-hoon becoming a murderer. Then reality crashes into the story. When Muno arrives, there is no fire, no bodies, no hostage situation. Si-yoon, Eun-jo, and Soo-hoon all walk outside alive. The finale never explicitly explains what really happened inside the house. Instead, it shifts our attention to something more important. The mystery was never the point. The point was watching Muno abandon every principle he once claimed defined good writing. Earlier in the episode, Lee Kang refuses to write that Kim Soo-hoon murdered Min-wee because he never witnessed it himself. Muno argues that creative license can fill in the gaps. Moments later, he does exactly that in real life. He sees only the version of events that fits the story he wants to tell. Whether Soo-hoon is guilty almost becomes irrelevant. Muno has already declared him guilty long before any proof exists. At first, Kang's refusal to finish the novel seems driven by exhaustion. His father's illness has left him emotionally drained, and he no longer wants to continue writing. But the finale reveals there was another reason. He wanted Muno to finish the story himself. This is the most important twist in the series. For years, Muno criticized Kang's writing, while insisting that authors must discover the truth objectively. Yet, when confronted with his own unfinished narrative, Muno immediately abandons those standards. He writes exactly the ending he wants, not the one he can prove. Kang understands that his professor cannot resist finishing the manuscript. By handing over authorship, Kang quietly hands Muno the rope with which he will destroy himself. Lee Kang manipulated Muno, and the answer lies 12 years in the past. As a child living in an orphanage, Kang meets Muno during what appears to be an ordinary volunteer visit. For one brief afternoon, Muno changes the boy's life. Instead of forcing Kang to discuss his trauma directly, he invents the story of the Duck family. Through fiction, Kang finally finds a way to express his grief. That single conversation inspires him to become a writer. Then Muno immediately erases everything that moment meant. Once Kang is gone, Muno dismisses him as nothing special. Just another orphan, not worth remembering, not worth writing about. For Kang, this becomes the defining contradiction of his mentor. Muno teaches compassion through storytelling, but practices indifference in real life. The finale suggests that Kang spends the next 12 years designing a story capable of exposing that hypocrisy. His revenge isn't physical, it's literary. He forces Muno to become the tragic protagonist of his own lessons. By the end of the finale, Muno has lost nearly every aspect of his life. His novel disappears, his academic reputation collapses, the university disciplines him, students publicly humiliate him, his wife leaves him. Even Kim Soo-hoon, the man he tried to expose, remains publicly untouched. Yet none of these losses happen because Kang fabricates evidence. Instead, Kang allows Muno's own decisions to expose him. Every accusation made against Muno is rooted in choices he actually made. He accepted authorship of the manuscript, he encouraged writing without proof, he became obsessed with proving Soo-hoon's guilt, he neglected his marriage, he ignored his responsibilities. Kang simply puts those choices into motion. The irony is devastating. Muno always believed great fiction required extraordinary events. Instead, his own ordinary flaws become the foundation of the most compelling story of his career. Perhaps the finale's biggest revelation is that Min-wee was never real. She exists only inside Kang's manuscript. This completely transforms our understanding of the season. We naturally assume we're watching an investigation into a murder. Instead, we're watching an investigation into storytelling itself. Min-wee functions almost like a literary device. She is the fictional spark that allows Kang to observe how Muno reacts when fiction begins resembling reality. Every time Muno chooses imagination over evidence, he proves Kang's point. The fake murder becomes less important than the real moral collapse it exposes. The recurring image of the Duck family becomes the emotional heart of the finale. As a child, Kang projects his own grief onto the Ducks. Unable to discuss losing his parents directly, he tells their story instead. Muno recognizes exactly what Kang is doing. For one beautiful moment, he becomes the mentor Kang desperately needed. Years later, that same memory returns after Muno realizes the truth. He remembers the lonely boy sitting beside the pond. Only now does he understand what that child eventually became. The ducks symbolize storytelling at its purest. Stories aren't merely entertainment, they're survival. They're how people process grief, trauma, and identity. Ironically, Muno teaches Kang this lesson better than anyone, then spends the rest of his life forgetting it. The closing conversation is remarkably understated. Muno now works quietly in a bookstore. The once famous professor has become an ordinary bookseller. When Kang enters holding Faust, their conversation appears casual, but every line carries deeper meaning. Muno remarks that understanding how a classic was written makes reading it even richer. Kang agrees. Then he announces that he's come seeking guidance. He wants help writing his own story. At first, this sounds almost compassionate. Perhaps Kang has forgiven him. Then comes the final line, "It's to be continued." The phrase completely changes the scene. Kang isn't asking for mentorship because he needs help. He's inviting Muno into another story. Whether that story becomes redemption, reconciliation, or another carefully constructed psychological game remains unanswered. The finale deliberately leaves both possibilities open. The final episode isn't ultimately about murder, revenge, or plagiarism. It's about responsibility. Throughout the series, Muno repeatedly argues that writers possess enormous power to shape reality through words. The finale forces him to experience the consequences of that belief. When he abandons truth in favor of the story he wants to tell, fiction begins destroying his real life. Meanwhile, Lee Kang represents the opposite philosophy. He understands that stories are powerful precisely because people choose to believe them. Rather than inventing lies, he allows Muno's own assumptions, prejudices, and ambitions to write the ending for him. In many ways, Kang never becomes the author of Muno's downfall. Muno does. That is why the series ends inside a bookstore instead of a courtroom or a prison. The real conflict has never been about crime. It's always been about storytelling. The final conversation suggests that every ending is simply the beginning of another narrative. Muno once believed he could decide which stories deserve to be told and which people were worth remembering. By the end, he learns the lesson Lee Kang has been teaching him all along. Every person is the protagonist of their own story, and the most dangerous stories are often the ones we convince ourselves are true.